Welcome to MindMap HQ. I'm the curator.
And I'm the explorer.
And today we're doing something that, honestly, requires a bit of a deep breath before we start. We're going to be dissecting one of the most infamous texts of the 20th century.
We are. And I think to kick things off, we need to throw a real grenade into the room. I want you, the listener, to just for a second suspend your judgment, push down that, the completely understandable knee-jerk reaction we all have.
Okay, I'm listening.
And just consider this premise. Is it possible, is it even remotely conceivable that this book, this reviled, destructive piece of writing, isn't just the incoherent ravings of a lunatic?
That's a huge question.
It is. But is it possible that it's actually a cold, calculated step-by-step manual? A blueprint that, and this is the terrifying part, worked exactly as it was designed to.
So you're framing it not as madness, but as a kind of, a dark architecture, a system.
A system. Because look at the source material we've got in front of us. It claims to be a blueprint for action. And the thing that should keep us up at night is that the author, starting as a total nobody, a homeless drifter in Vienna, managed to take over a modern industrial nation in a little over a decade using the exact logic, the exact psychological levers laid out in these pages.
I see where you're going. It's the evil genius argument.
Right.
But I have to counter right away. Logic does not equal truth.
Oh, absolutely not.
You can build a skyscraper of perfect, internally consistent logic on a foundation of absolute sludge, You can have a system that makes perfect sense within its own rules, but is completely dangerously detached from reality.
Garbage in, garbage out, 100%.
Exactly. And I think that's what we're looking at today. We are dissecting a text that, at its core, relies on a fundamental rejection of everything we'd consider a normal functioning society. Democratic norms, compromise, the value of the individual, it all gets thrown out.
And replaced.
Replaced with this great man theory that is, intellectually seductive to some people, especially desperate people, but practically catastrophic.
But that's the hook, isn't it? To understand the catastrophe, the absolute nightmare of the 20th century, you can't just look at the rubble in 1945.
Yeah.
You can't just look at the camps or the bombed-out cities.
You have to go back.
You have to look at the map the architect drew before he laid a single brick. You have to read the schematics.
Okay, I agree with that. So let's talk about the schematics we're using. We need to address the mammoth in the room right up front. Why this book and why this specific translation now in 2026?
It's the question. Why not just leave it in the dustbin of history? Burn it, bury it, forget it.
Because, and this is what the introduction to our source material argues, this book has been functionally censored for decades. Everybody knows the title, they know the author, but they have zero idea what is actual inside the book.
They've just been told it's unreadable.
Exactly, that it's just ranting, that it's turgid, badly written prose. But Thomas Dalton, the translator here, he makes a pretty bold argument. He says that previous translations, the famous ones like the Mannheim or the Murphy versions, were often intentionally garbled.
Intentionally hostile, even. I found that point in the footnotes fascinating. The idea that translators in the 40s and 50s deliberately wanted to make the author sound more incoherent than he was.
Why, though? What would be the purpose of that?
To sort of strip away any power the text might have. If you make the monster sound like a buffoon, like an idiot, maybe you think you're protecting people from his ideas. You rob him of his charisma.
Dalton argues they used awkward phrasing, deliberately clunky sentences to make him sound stupid. But Dalton's goal here, and that's why we're using this version, is to render the German into clear, modern, readable English. He wants to show the text as it was intended to be read.
Which is a risky strategy if you think about it. But I get the point. Because if you make a monster sound like a buffoon, you underestimate him.
You stop looking for the logic.
You stop looking for the logic in the madness. And then you get blindsided when that logic, however twisted, actually appeals to millions of people.
Right.
If we want to understand how this happened, we have to hear the voice clearly.
Precisely. So, disclaimer time. And this is the big one. The mission of this deep dive is not to endorse. Absolutely not.
Not in any way, shape, or form.
Our mission is to dissect the system of thought. We are looking at the mechanics of how a worldview, a Weltanschauung, as the text calls it over and over again, is constructed. How do you go from poverty and resentment and failure to a coherent ideology that can move millions of people to action?
So we're basically a bomb disposal team.
I like that metaphor.
We want to see the wires, the timer, the chemical compounds, the explosive material, all without setting the thing off. We are decoding the logic of the text.
Exactly. So let's open that map. Stage 1 of this worldview is what the text calls the school of life. This is the origin story.
And reading the first few chapters, it's striking how much it reads like a twisted version of a hero's journey. It's almost cinematic in its construction.
It really is, and it starts with a very specific, very foundational conflict in chapter 1. The text literally calls it the fork in the road, and it's the conflict between the father and the son.
The classic generational clash. A tale as old as time, right? The father wants one thing, the son wants another.
But look at what they represent in the text. This isn't just dad won't let me borrow the car. The father is a civil servant, a customs official. He represents the Austrian state. He represents stability, bureaucracy, a pension.
The uniform.
A security.
He represents what the text calls the golden cage.
The golden cage, that's a sticky image. It really stays with you.
It does. The father, he worked his entire life to escape peasant farming and get to that level of security, and all he wants is for his son to have the same safe, predictable life. But the son...
The son wants to be an artist, and later, when that fails, an architect.
Which represents what?
Destiny, creation, struggle, grandeur, everything the civil service job is not. Exactly. So the text frames this not just as, I didn't want my dad's boring job. It frames it as a fundamental philosophical rejection of the entire comfortable middle-class existence. He writes about being the young ringleader who couldn't sit still in school, who was drawn to conflict.
He's setting up this dichotomy right from page 1. Security versus greatness, the bureaucrat versus the genius, the safe path versus the path of destiny.
It's a very romantic, very adolescent view of the world in a way.
But a powerful one. And it becomes the justification for everything that follows. After his parents die, he moves to Vienna and he's totally broke. And there's a quote in the source material from this period that just jumped out at me.
What is it?
He calls it 5 years of hardship and misery. But then he says something really strange. He says, hunger was my faithful guardian.
My faithful guardian. I mean, that's a powerful literary device. He's personifying hunger.
He is. He's painting hunger not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a teacher, a mentor. He claims it was the only friend that never left him during those years. He says it forced him to understand the plight of the worker, to read books he wouldn't have read otherwise.
And here's my first stress test for this idea. Is this just survivor bias?
Oh, it's 100% survivor bias.
I mean, is this just romanticizing extreme poverty after the fact? Because plenty of people, millions of people, go hungry and don't invent a genocidal ideology. They just suffer.
That's a totally valid critique.
Right.
Vienna at that time was filled with hungry people. But within the logic of the book, that poverty is essential. He needs it to establish his credentials.
His street cred.
His street cred, exactly. He's telling the reader, I am not some coffeehouse intellectual. I didn't learn about the working class from a textbook in a university. I learned it because I was mixing cement on a construction site and freezing in a flophouse.
Yeah.
He needs that authenticity to sell the rest of the story.
And it also fuels his critique of charity. He explicitly attacks social charity in this section, which I found really interesting.
He hates it with a passion. He talks about seeing these wealthy Viennese ladies going into the poor districts to hand out soup or a few coins, and he says he was just filled with disgust.
But why? I mean, on the surface, most people would say that's a good thing, helping the poor.
Because for him, it's a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. He argues that tossing a bowl of soup to a starving man is useless window dressing. It does nothing to solve the underlying problem. It just allows the rich to feel good about themselves, while the system that creates the poverty remains completely intact.
So it's a cosmetic solution?
It's worse. It's a way to avoid a real solution. The text says you have to eliminate the fundamental deficiencies in the economic and cultural life that caused the poverty in the first place.
You know, it's strange. If you read that quote out of context, it sounds almost progressive. It sounds like he's setting up an argument for a system fix rather than just treating the symptoms.
It does, and that's the trap, isn't it? It sounds like he's about to argue for social justice. But his system fix isn't about better wages or unions, not in the traditional sense anyway. His fix is a radical, violent racial restructuring of society. But he hooks you, the reader, with this very relatable critique of the uncaring rich and their performative charity.
And this experience, this school of hard knocks, leads him directly to his time observing the Austrian parliament. This is chapter 3, and honestly, this is where the real architecture of his worldview starts to take shape. This is where he identifies the enemy in the very structure of government.
There's the 500 blockheads.
That's the phrase.
It's so dismissive. The 500 blockheads. He spends a lot of time sitting in the public gallery of the Reichsrat, the Austrian parliament. And the picture he paints is just one of utter chaos. He calls it a Babylonian empire of confusion.
And we really have to understand the context here because he's not entirely making it up. I was looking at the footnotes in the Dalton text on this to get a sense of the reality on the ground. And the Austrian parliament at this time was an absolute mess. You have to remember, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was this sprawling multi-ethnic thing. So you had representatives from all these different groups, Czechs, Poles, Hungarians, Germans, Slovenes, all in one room.
Often not even speaking the same language.
Exactly. The footnotes talk about them having translators on the floor, people shouting over each other because they literally couldn't understand one another. There were documented cases of fistfights breaking out, people throwing inkwells.
So it wasn't a dignified Senate debate. It was a brawl.
It was a brawl, and for this young, frustrated artist who craves order and unity and purpose, that visual chaos was proof. It was proof that the entire concept of democracy was a failure. It wasn't just this particular parliament is bad, it was the very idea of parliament is fundamentally flawed.
Let's unpack the specific argument he makes, though.
Yes.
It's a seductive piece of logic if you aren't careful. He argues that majority rule destroys individual responsibility.
This is a core concept for him. It's one of the pillars of the whole book. We're taught to think of majority rule as the gold standard of fairness, the will of the people.
Right.
But the text argues that if a group of 500 people makes a decision, no single person is actually responsible for the outcome.
Okay, let's play that out. So a parliamentary committee votes to build a bridge. The bridge is poorly designed and collapses, killing people. Who gets fired?
In his view, nobody. The majority is an abstract concept. You can't put the majority in jail. You can't fire the majority.
No.
The individual representatives can all hide behind the collective vote and say, well, I was just one vote among many. It's not my fault.
So if the ship of state hits an iceberg, the captain could just say, well, the navigation committee voted for this course, so don't blame me.
Precisely. He asks, and it's a rhetorical question, can a fluctuating majority of people ever be truly responsible for anything? He calls the parliamentarians cowardly scoundrels who are terrified of the light of responsibility. He argues that they love democracy specifically because it allows them to be incompetent without any personal consequences.
That hits hard, because we've all seen a version of that in modern life. We've all been in a corporate meeting where a terrible decision gets made because everyone just kind of nods along, and then when it all goes south, everyone points fingers and says, it wasn't my idea.
It's the diffusion of responsibility, and he contrasts this with what he calls the Germanic democracy concept, which is basically the leader principle, the Führer principle.
The CEO model of government.
Yeah.
Or a military command structure.
On steroids.
Yeah.
His idea is one leader is chosen or elected, and from that moment on, they have absolute authority. But, and this is the flip side, they also have absolute responsibility.
It's the buck stops here philosophy, taken to the extreme.
Exactly. If the leader succeeds, they get the glory. If the leader fails, they pay the price with their position or even their life. But there is no hiding behind a committee. There's no one else to blame.
But notice the path he took to get there. He didn't just start with, I want to be a dictator. The argument is constructed as a problem-solution loop. The problem: this parliament is chaotic, ineffective, and no one is accountable. The solution: a system where one person is accountable for everything. It's a line of reasoning that leads directly to authoritarianism.
And he backs it up with this visceral hatred of the huckstering he saw on the parliament floor. He talks about them bargaining for votes. I'll vote for your bridge in Prague if you vote for my road in Vienna.
He sees compromise not as a virtue, not as the necessary oil of a pluralistic society, but as a weakness, as corruption.
It's a sign of a lack of conviction. Which brings us to the next pillar of the worldview, the one that really solidifies during this period, the awakening.
This is segment 2 of our map. The text describes a convergence of two specific enemies during these Vienna years. They start as separate streams and then merge into one giant toxic river.
Marxism and Jewry.
Correct. And the text goes to really great lengths to describe this as a gradual conversion. This is absolutely crucial for the narrative he's trying to build. He doesn't want to sound like a born fanatic.
Yeah, reading that part was surprising if all you know is the later caricature. He claims that when he first came to Vienna, he thought religious prejudice was unworthy of a civilized people. He says he saw Jews as just Germans with a different religion and actually argued against the anti-Semites he met.
He's trying to establish himself as a rational, objective observer. He wants the reader to think, oh, he was tolerant, just like me. He started from a reasonable position. He's building a bridge to the moderate, skeptical reader. And once you're on that bridge with him, he hits you with the turning point.
The apparition.
The man in the caftan.
Can you describe that scene from the text? It's written so deliberately, almost like a scene in a film.
So he says he's walking through the inner city of Vienna, probably in the Leopoldstadt district, which was the historic Jewish quarter, and he sees a figure he's never seen before. A man in a long black caftan with black hair locks. An Orthodox Jew, likely from the East, from Galicia. And the first question that pops into his head is this a Jew?
A simple question of identification.
But then, he says, he silently corrected himself. He looked closer, and he asked a different, more profound question. Is this a German?
And that, right there, that is the pivot point of the entire book.
It's everything. Is this a German?
Because it shifts the entire issue. It's no longer about religion, what you believe, which can change. It's now about race and nation, what you are, which in his view is immutable. And if the answer to is this a German is no, then they are a foreign body within the state.
And from that moment, he says he started to see them everywhere. He started buying anti-Semitic pamphlets for a few pennies, but this is where the text gets, well, it gets visceral.
Yeah.
It stops being a political or philosophical argument, and it starts being biological.
Yeah, the descriptions. We have to call this out because it's so disturbing and so revealing. He becomes obsessed with cleanliness. He sarcastically calls them water lovers, and he talks about the smell.
There's a direct quote. The odor of those people in caftans often made me sick to my stomach.
It's an obsession with physical revulsion. It's primal.
It is, and this is where I have to challenge the entire premise of logic that he claims to be operating on. He keeps saying reason guided him. He has this whole passage where he says he had to fight his sentiment, which was his initial tolerance, with his cold, hard reason. But reading these descriptions of smell and dirt, this isn't reason. This is disgust. This is a deep-seated emotional phobia.
That's a brilliant observation. He frames the entire journey as rational anti-Semitism as the logical conclusion of his studies, but the evidence he actually provides is entirely sensory and emotional. He's grossed out, and he builds this massive world historical philosophy to justify that feeling of being grossed out.
And then he makes the connection. He links this physical revulsion to a political one. He starts reading the social democratic press, the Marxist papers, and he claims he made a stunning discovery.
The linkage. This is the moment in the story where he connects the two enemies into one unified super enemy.
Right. He starts noticing the names of the writers and the editors. He claims that the people writing the filthy modern plays, the people directing the cultural trash in the art world, and the people leading the Marxist political parties and unions were all, disproportionately, from the same group. He explicitly links the social democratic press with Jewish leadership.
He calls it a pestilence, a spiritual plague. There's a quote. Only then did I truly understand who the evil seducers of our people were. I mean, it's conspiracy theory thinking 101.
It's the classic move. You find 2 or 3 things you hate, in his case, cultural decay as he sees it, like modern art and political unrest like strikes and protests, and you find a single identifiable group to blame for all of them.
It simplifies the world. It makes it easy to understand.
It's the unified field theory of hate. If you're a poor, frustrated worker in Vienna and your life is hard and the politics are confusing and the culture feels alien, this book offers you a skeleton key. It hands you a simple answer and says, it's not bad luck, it's not complex economics, it's not your fault, it's him. That guy in the caftan and the people who think like him, they are doing this to you on purpose.
And that level of certainty, that single cause for all your problems, that leads us directly into the war. Stage 2, segment 3. Because if Vienna was the school, then World War I was the graduation ceremony.
Chapters 5 through 10 cover the war years. And you have to remember, for most people who wrote about it, World War I was a senseless, brutal horror show. But the text describes his enlistment in the Bavarian army as a deliverance.
A deliverance from what?
From the confusion and degeneracy of Vienna. He says he literally fell on his knees and thanked heaven for the opportunity to fight. He calls the first battle a baptism by fire.
So for him, the war was clarity. No more confusing parliamentary debates, no more multi-ethnic squabbling, no more complexity. Just us versus them. Survival of the fittest.
He thrives in it. He's a good soldier, a runner, gets decorated for bravery. He describes the war years as the greatest and most unforgettable time of his life. He finally had a purpose, a tribe, a mission.
And then comes the crash, the
Is
collapse, 1918.
the stab in the back, the Dolchstoß. We have to understand this concept because it is the emotional and psychological fuel for everything that comes later. The text asserts with absolute certainty that the German army was not defeated on the field of battle.
Which is, I mean, factually debatable, to say the least.
Factually incorrect is more like it. By late 1918, the German army was exhausted, the blockade was causing starvation back home, they were running out of men, and the Americans had arrived with hundreds of thousands of fresh troops. The game was up.
But in his narrative, the front was holding. He insists the German soldier was undefeated. The defeat, he claims, came from within.
He talks about the munition strike. While he and his comrades are in the trenches, dying, workers back home are striking for better wages and an end to the war. And he sees this as an act of treason, allegedly orchestrated by this Jewish Marxist alliance. He feels it as a deep personal betrayal.
And then, the physical trauma that ties it all together, October 1918.
The mustard gas attack. This is the climax of his personal narrative. He's temporarily blinded by a British gas shell near Ypres. He's in a military hospital in Passwalk in Pomerania, recovering his sight.
And while he is lying there, blind, with his eyes burning in pain, a pastor comes into the ward and tells the wounded soldiers that the war is over. The Kaiser has abdicated. Germany is now a republic.
The text describes this moment as the ultimate psychological pivot. He says, everything went black again before my eyes. He implies the shock of the news made his blindness return. He says he buried his head in his pillow and cried for the first time since his mother's funeral.
And in that moment of darkness, he makes a decision. The architect is dead. The politician is born.
It's written like a villain origin story in a comic book, but it's presented as fact. He says, in that hospital bed, I decided to enter politics.
And the lesson he takes from this whole collapse is crucial. He believes Germany failed not because of a lack of weapons or poor strategy, but because of a failure of will and a failure of propaganda. He looks across the channel at the British propaganda, and he admires it.
He's actually a huge fan of British propaganda. It's one of the stranger parts of the book.
A huge fan. He says the British were geniuses because they understood that propaganda's job is not to be objective or fair. Its job is to motivate your own side and demonize the enemy.
So while the Germans were, in his view, trying to be objective and say, well, the enemy is human too, the British were putting out posters of the Hun who crucifies soldiers and eats babies. And he says, the British were right to do that.
He says objectivity is weakness. In a life or death struggle, you don't want to be fair. You want to be fanatical. You have to paint the enemy as an absolute devil to get your people to fight to the death.
Precisely. And that mentality, that lesson, takes us deep into the rabbit hole, stage 3 of the map. Because now we have to look at the philosophy, the actual worldview that emerged from all this trauma.
Yeah.
And that means we have to talk about race.
Chapter 11. Nation and race. This is the engine room of the entire ideology. Everything else is built on top of this chapter.
It is. And the source material posits what it claims is a fundamental law of nature regarding the purity of blood.
I want to drill down on the specific definition of Aryan that the text uses, because we all have this pop culture image of, blonde hair and blue eyes, the movie version. But the text defines it in a much more psychological way.
That's a great point. It's not primarily about physical appearance. The text defines the Aryan as the Prometheus of mankind, the founder of culture. But the defining characteristic is not intelligence. Hitler explicitly says the Aryan isn't necessarily smarter than other races.
Wait, really? So it's not a master race in terms of raw IQ?
Not primarily, no. The single most important defining trait of the Aryan, according to this book, is idealism.
Idealism? That's nice. What does he actually mean by that word?
He means the capacity for self-sacrifice, the willingness to subordinate your own ego, your own life, for the good of the community. He argues that the Aryan is the only type of human who will willingly die for an abstract idea, for the state, for the nation, for the tribe. That capacity to say, the group matters more than I do, is what allows for the creation of civilization.
So the logic is, the Aryan builds the state because he's the only one willing to die for it. And then, logically, he has to set up the counter-archetype, the opposite force.
The Jew. The text defines the Jewish people as the absolute antithesis of the Aryan. He argues that they have a powerful will to survive, perhaps the strongest will of any people on earth. But, he argues, it is a will based purely on egoism. He claims they possess no idealism.
So in his twisted view, they won't die for a state. They will only ever fight for their own individual self-preservation or the preservation of their immediate family or group.
Exactly. And because their primary drive is just to live, they become a parasite. He uses these biological metaphors constantly. Fungus, bacillus, a parasite in the body of other nations. He argues that since they had no national territory of their own at the time, they must live inside other nations and, like a parasite, hollow them out from within for their own survival.
It's such a dark inversion of logic. He's basically saying we are superior because we are willing to die. They are inferior because they just want to live.
Which is where we have to bring in what you call the Dalton defense.
Right. We have to circle back to Thomas Dalton, our translator, and his introduction. Because Dalton makes a very controversial claim. He argues that we should see Hitler as an ethnicist, not a racist, in the modern universal sense of the word.
Can you explain that distinction?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like splitting hairs.
It does, but it's important to understand the argument. Dalton points out that the text actually expresses admiration for certain other races, specifically the Japanese. The book calls them culture bearers. He respects them.
But why? They aren't Aryan.
Because, in his view, they maintained their racial purity. Dalton's argument is that Hitler's issue wasn't a global white supremacy. He didn't want to rule Japanese or Africans. He wanted German purity for Germans in Germany. He respected any race that kept itself pure and fought for its own survival. His unique, venomous hatred was reserved only for the group he defined as the international parasite, the one that crosses borders, mixes, and, in his view, destroys culture.
It's a nuanced distinction, but a pretty dangerous one.
Yeah.
Because the underlying premise is still that purity is the highest moral good and mixing is the ultimate sin.
Exactly. And the dark side of this logic is absolutely horrific. If you follow the text's reasoning to its conclusion, it says that nature desires the strong to rule and the weak to perish. Therefore, compassion for the weak, what he mockingly calls humanitarianism, is actually a sin against nature.
He has a quote for that, doesn't he?
He calls it a mixture of stupidity, cowardice, and self-conceit. That idea is genuinely terrifying. He is saying that being nice, being charitable, protecting the vulnerable, that is actually morally wrong, that you are fighting against the will of the universe when you do that.
It's social Darwinism taken to its absolute most brutal extreme.
Yeah.
He believes that if you create systems that help the weak survive and reproduce, you are actively lowering the quality of the human species over time.
It's not just anti-human, it's a completely different moral framework.
It's pro-nature, in his view. He thinks humans are animals and should stop pretending they aren't. The wolf doesn't feel sorry for the deer. That's his model for statecraft.
Let's shift from that horrifying philosophy to the practical application, the psychology of the masses, because this is where the blueprint gets really, really practical. This isn't just theory. This is a marketing manual.
It is absolute marketing genius, and it's sickening to say that, but it's true. The text breaks down step by step exactly how to manipulate and control a large crowd of people.
He starts with this distinction between the spoken word and the written word.
And he has nothing but disdain for intellectuals and their scribbling.
Oh.
He says you can never start a great movement with a pamphlet. Revolutions, he insists, are made by the spoken word.
And what's his reasoning for that?
It's interactive. He says when you are standing in front of a crowd speaking, you can see their faces. You can feel their reaction in real time.
You can read the room.
You can read the room. He says if they don't understand a point, you can see the confusion on their faces and explain it differently. If they start to get angry, you can feed that anger. If they are hopeful, you can amplify that hope. You can't do that with a book. A book is static. A speech is a living, dynamic thing.
And then he drops this line that is just so revealing. He calls the masses feminine.
He does. It's profoundly sexist, of course, but it's crucial to understanding his strategy. He says the psyche of the broad masses is not receptive to anything that is weak or halfway. He says they are like a woman whose emotional life is governed less by abstract reason and more by a yearning for a force that will complete them. He says they would rather submit to a strong ruler than govern a petitioner.
So his argument is that the crowd doesn't want to be reasoned with. The crowd wants to be dominated.
Yes. He argues they don't want to hear a balanced, nuanced argument where you say, well, on the one hand this, but on the other hand that. They want to be overwhelmed by a single, powerful, emotional truth. They crave certainty, not complexity.
He even gets down to the tactical details, like the timing of your events. He says you should always hold political meetings in the evening, not in the morning.
And why is that?
Because in the evening, people's psychological resistance is lower. Their willpower has been drained by a full day of work. They are tired. They are more open to suggestion. Their critical faculties are dimmed.
It's the same reason infomercials run at 2 o'clock in the morning. He is biohacking the electorate. It's pure psychological warfare.
Absolutely. He talks about deliberately using the color red for his party's posters. Why? Specifically to provoke the leftists, the communists, and social democrats whose color was red. He wanted them to get angry and come to his meetings to start fights.
Because a quiet meeting is a boring meeting.
But a meeting where a brawl breaks out, that creates energy, that creates headlines in the paper the next day. It makes the movement seem exciting and dangerous and alive.
He turned politics into a spectator sport. It was like MMA with podiums. He understood on a gut level that most people are driven by powerful, simple emotions, resentment, fear, hope, hatred, not by a careful weighing of facts and figures.
Speaking of facts, that seems like the perfect transition to stage 4, the skeptic's corner, because for all its internal logic, there are some massive, gaping, logical holes in this architecture, and I really want to poke at them.
Let's do it. Where do you want to start?
The biggest one, for me, involves the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Oh boy, the most famous and destructive piece of fake news in history.
So this comes up in Chapter 11. He brings up the Protocols. Now, for context, for anyone listening who doesn't know, the Protocols was a forged document created by the Russian secret police around 1900 that claimed to be the minutes of a secret meeting of Jewish leaders plotting to take over the world.
And by the 1920s, when he was writing, it had been thoroughly debunked. The Frankfurter Zeitung, a major, respected German newspaper, had published a series of articles exposing it as a crude forgery, tracing it back to its sources.
And Hitler acknowledges that in the text. He says, and I'm paraphrasing, the Frankfurter Zeitung moans and cries to the world that the protocols are based on a forgery.
So he admits the evidence says they are fake. But then listen to the insane logical leap he makes. He says, this is the surest proof that they are genuine.
Wait, can you walk me through that again? How does that work?
His logic is this. The protocols expose the secret Jewish plan. The press is controlled by the Jews. Therefore, the fact that the Jewish press is working so hard to discredit the protocols by calling them a forgery proves they must be authentic.
That is the ultimate circular logic. It's a completely sealed system. If you deny the accusation, it only proves you are guilty.
It's a perfect conspiracy loop. You cannot argue with it. It's unfalsifiable. If new evidence comes out that supports the theory, or the theory is true. If new evidence comes out that contradicts the theory, that evidence was obviously planted by the conspirators to throw us off the scent, which proves the theory is still true.
So how do you even begin to debate someone who thinks like that?
You can't, and that's the point. He says something even more revealing later. He says, what many Jews may do unconsciously is here consciously exposed, and that is what is decisive. He's basically saying, even if this specific document is technically a forgery, the vibe is true, the general idea is correct.
Truthiness. He literally invented the concept of truthiness 100 years early.
In a way, yes. He argues that what is true to the masses is whatever aligns with their lived experience. If they feel broke and powerless and cheated, and you hand them a document that says, here is the secret plan of the people who are cheating you, they will accept it as true because it validates their pain, regardless of its actual origins.
That connects right back to his contempt for the 500 blockheads in Parliament. He doesn't care about procedural truth or factual accuracy. He only cares about what feels emotionally true to his target audience.
Okay, here's my second major attack on his logic. The Führer principle, the leader principle itself. We talked about how he despises democracy because no one takes responsibility. But he completely ignores the obvious catastrophic flaw in his own proposed system.
Go on.
If you consolidate all power, all authority, and all responsibility into one great man, one supreme leader, what happens when the great man goes insane? Or gets bad information? Or just makes a really, really bad bet?
The system has no brakes, no safety valve.
Exactly. In a messy democracy, if the leader is an idiot or becomes a danger, you can vote him out. The legislature can block him. The courts can intervene. It's slow, it's inefficient, it's full of that huckstering he hated. But it prevents total systemic collapse. It spreads the risk.
In his system.
In his system, which he openly admits relies on the singular genius of the leader, if that genius decides it's a brilliant idea to invade Russia in the winter.
The entire nation goes over the cliff with him.
Right. He creates a system with a single point of failure. And the text even hints at this risk. He talks about how rare true political geniuses are, but he just sort of assumes that providence or nature will magically select the right one for Germany.
So it's not a political strategy at the end of the day. It's a mystical belief. It's a gamble.
A gamble with the lives of millions. And as history showed, he gambled the entire nation and lost spectacularly. But you have to admit, listening to all this, the analysis of poverty, the resentment, the branding, the propaganda, the psychology, as a blueprint for gaining power, it was terrifyingly effective.
That's the scariest part. It wasn't just a theory. It worked. It took a tiny fringe party meeting in beer halls and turned it into the absolute ruler of Germany.
So let's move to stage 5, the ROI verdict. Good or bad, billionaire style. If we can strip away the moral horror for just a moment, which is incredibly hard to do, what are the non-negotiable practical takeaways from this map? What can it teach us about how mass movements, for good or for ill, are actually built?
I've got 3 specific takeaways that I think are the core principles of the entire text.
Lead to me.
Number 1, the priority of the spoken word. This is huge for him. Mass movements are built on speech, on emotion, on the direct, almost electric connection between a speaker and a live audience. You cannot build a fanatical following with academic white papers and PDFs. You need the rally. You need the human voice.
That holds up 100% today. Look at the modern media landscape. Look at YouTube. Look at podcasts. Look at TikTok. The people who are dominating the cultural conversation are the ones speaking directly into a camera or a microphone.
Number 2, the incompatibility of opposites. This is a massive theme throughout the book. He argues that you cannot and should not compromise with a worldview you believe is a destructive plague. He says you must be intolerant of what you consider to be poison.
He has that line, the strong is most powerful when alone.
Exactly. He refused to enter into coalitions with other nationalist parties in the early days. He said if you mix your pure wine with water, you just get bad wine. He would rather have a small, fanatical, ideologically pure group than a large, watered-down, compromised coalition. And historically, that discipline allowed the Nazis to eventually devour all the other larger conservative parties. They didn't dilute their message. They stayed pure, and it worked.
And what's number 3?
The centrality of will. The source text argues over and over and over again. Weapons don't ultimately matter. The economy doesn't ultimately matter. The only thing that saves a state is the collective will for self-preservation. If a people believes it deserves to exist and is willing to fight for it, they will find the weapons and the resources. If they lose that will, all the tanks and planes in the world won't save them.
It's the mindset is everything argument. It's the Tony Robbins from hell approach to geopolitics.
It is, and it's terrifyingly motivational if you happen to agree with the premise.
Okay, so, verdict time. Based on this deep dive, is this book essential wisdom or overhyped fluff?
I absolutely cannot call it wisdom because the end result was utter moral and physical ruin, but I will call it essential knowledge. If you want to understand the architecture of radicalization and the mechanics of hate, this is the original blueprint. You have to read it to understand the enemy.
I agree with that. I would call it terrifying wisdom. It's a masterclass in the dark arts of political mobilization and the psychology of resentment. It is absolutely not fluff. It is a loaded gun that someone left on a table, and we need to understand exactly how it works.
It's a foundational map for understanding the darkest parts of modern political history. It shows us that evil, with a capital E, isn't random or chaotic. The Holocaust didn't just happen by accident one day. It was theorized, it was written down, it was printed and sold in bookstores for years before it was ever executed. It has a structure, a logic, and a literature.
That's the most chilling part of all. He told everyone exactly what he was going to do, and he did it.
And people at the time, smart people, dismissed it. They said, oh, he's just talking tough to get votes. He doesn't really mean all that crazy stuff.
They didn't take him literally or seriously until it was too late.
So we're at the outro. As we close this out, what is the one thing you want our listener to take away from this entire discussion?
My one thing is about the 25 points. We mentioned them briefly. They're the appendix of the source material. It's the official party platform, right? Most people, when they think of it, they focus on the nationalism, revoking the Treaty of Versailles, creating a greater Germany. But you have to look closely at the socialism in those points. He demands profit sharing in heavy industries. He demands the abolition of unearned income. He demands a massive expansion of old age insurance. He demands the confiscation of all war profit.
If you just read those points, it sounds nice. It sounds like he's for the little guy.
That's the trap. He creates this brilliant, toxic blend. He offers nationalism to the patriots, the military, and the traditional conservatives, and he offers socialism to the workers, the farmers, and the people crushed by the economy. He argues that true nationalism is taking care of the poorest of your nation. By blending those two powerful ideas, he created a political product that could appeal to almost every single person who felt angry and left behind. So my advice is, be very, very wary of any movement that promises to solve everything by blending two historically incompatible ideas. It's often a trap.
That's a great point. My one thing is about that split between reason and sentiment we talked about earlier. The text explicitly says he used his reason to find justification for his sentiment of hatred. So my takeaway for you is this. Be wary of anyone on any side of the aisle who tells you that their hatred is rational. If someone expresses a deep physical disgust for a group of people and then writes a 700-page book full of cherry-picked facts in pseudoscience to explain why that disgust is actually a scientific law of nature, you need to run. That is not logic. That is the rationalization of a pre-existing prejudice.
A powerful warning.
And look, if you want to see a visual breakdown of some of these concepts, the race ladder he describes in Chapter 11, the structure of the 500 blockheads argument, the map of his formative years in Vienna, we've put together a visual mind map on our YouTube channel.
Sometimes seeing the structure laid out visually can really help it click.
It definitely can. This has been, well, it's been intense.
It has, but I think it was necessary.
Keep mapping.
And stay curious.